story is about something that happened in 1998, 10 years after my first book was published. I was invited to the Harborfront Literary Festival, to my first invitation of that kind, and I was really excited to go. In the mid-'70s, when I was a teenager, I'd lived in Toronto, where I supported myself selling stuff on the street: candles, jewelry, flowers, and then in my early 20s by stripping in clubs and bars. It was an intense, insecure time, and so the idea of the prospect of returning as a published writer felt really good to me. I got a lot of advanced requests for interviews on the phone, and I was really impressed that Canadians were so into literature. I found it odd that so many of the interviewers focused on my early life, particularly stripping and sex work. Nonetheless, I went to Toronto with just enthusiastic anticipations, which was rudely shocked when a festival intern who picked me up at the airport handed me a brochure in which I was described as a former prostitute and mental patient. These descriptors were true, but surprisingly little space was given to my writing, which I would have thought was the more germane truth. It was described as, rather grudgingly, as honest. I don't cry very much, but reading this actually made me cry. I don't mean sobbing, but sort of snuffling and tears running down my face. The intern handed me a box of Kleenex and suggested that I not take it personally, that they were just going for controversy and excitement. I apologized for crying. It seemed to make her uncomfortable, and I didn't think it was her fault, but I did note that no one else seemed to be described in such an exciting and controversial way. She apparently told the festival organizer about my response, because immediately after I checked into the hotel, he showed up in my room. He plainly expected to see a sobbing, collapsed person, but by that time, I was royally pissed off. I mean, up in his face and yelling, pissed off. I don't remember much about the exchange, only that he said, in a probably sincerely conciliatory effort, "We certainly don't mean to hurt or humiliate anyone," to which I responded loudly, "Oh no? So I guess that means you don't think I'm anyone." He left exuding the feeling of, God, what a bitch. And I got on the phone and called my boyfriend, soon-to-be husband, and said, "I think I have to leave. I can't cooperate with this shit." And he said, "No, don't leave. Stand your ground." And I said, "How can I do that? Anything I do to fight back will just be evidence that I'm a big bitch." And he said, "Well, don't fight like a bitch. Fight like a queen." And I was like, huh. And I didn't have to decide right then. The festival was a week or so long, and I didn't have to do anything for a few days. So I decided to hang tight and make a decision later. There was another, more sentimental reason to stay. I wanted to roam the streets and have feelings. I especially wanted to have feelings about a woman that I'd been close to when I was there, a wonderful stripper I'm going to call Valerie, not her real name. Wonderful because of her strength and her real goodness in the face of great odds, and a legendary act she did stripping out of a nun's costume to raunchy music. I had fallen out of touch with her decades earlier, and I'd been kind of looking for her off and on for quite a while. And miraculously on that trip, I found her, or rather she found me. She read about the festival in a giveaway paper and was able to call me at the hotel. I still remember her tentative voice saying, "Do you remember me?" And me going, "Are you kidding? You thought I would forget you?" It was an incredible reunion. By that time, she was the mother of 3 children and was running her own small business. I could see when I sat across from her at dinner that her life had not been easy, but she still had that courage and resolve, and as she had in the past, she made me feel it too. It was also poignant to remember the world of stripping then, which is not lap dancing in that place and time, but rather a playful world of costume and persona that I could not help but link to the literary persona and psychic costume on display at the festival. I described to her what was going on there, and she, of course, got it. She said, "You've always been so open. I've admired you for it, but it's not always a good idea. People, no matter how liberal they think they are, don't understand, and they're just going to project a lot of stuff on you, and pretty much none of it is going to be good." And I remembered how cautious she had been about who she told what she did, and now, in her present moment, she didn't want anybody to know, particularly not her children. She intended that they should never know. And this, more than anything, that this wonderful person would feel like she had to hide something that she did, which, as executed by her, was pretty great. I mean, I'm talking life-affirming, capital L, capital A. It made me want to, instead of doing a reading, give a talk about how people are labeled and categorized. I spent some earnest time on this, and when I practiced it, I felt good. But it did occur to me at the last minute that maybe to give an indignant speech when people had come to hear a reading was maybe kind of obnoxious, maybe even grandstanding. The talk was actually only maybe 10, 15 minutes, and I had half an hour. So I hastily picked out the shortest story that I had without giving a whole lot of thought to the content. It had, after all, been published in the New Yorker. What could go wrong? The talk went over great. I basically said that to describe anybody the way I had been described in a brochure was grossly reductive and harmful, not just to me, but really in a more subtle way to everybody. I linked it to the broader social temptation to do that to people, to sort of make them into this easily understood thing that could then be either dismissed or worshipped, or even worse, both. And now that just made everybody stupider and smaller. People loved it. There was applause. And so I thanked them and said I was going to read a story called Turger. Turger is about a lonely, horny, middle-aged woman who is giving a blowjob, or at least trying to a kind of snotty young man. And it turned out to be a comically bad choice. I think if it had been written in a really sad or even brutal tone, it would have been okay. But it's actually rather light and melancholy, but funny. And the middle-aged woman is kind of a snot herself. And I think it was that tone that offended people. I remember looking out at some point and seeing people's faces like, but I powered through, even though I was thinking, oh crap, I just shot myself in the foot. But at least Valerie was there in the front row, on my side, regardless. Afterward, there was some support from writers, particularly from Edwige Danticat and the Canadian writer Lynn Crosby. But there was blowback, too, from some of the festival goers and journalists. A woman actually came up to the signing table and said to me, "I liked what you said before the reading." And a man said, "I don't know why you have an objection to being described as a prostitute. You're selling sex." I said, that wasn't sex. That was a story. But although I defended myself, I was kind of unclear about, did I do something wrong or just stupid and weird? It was a story, and the characters were not prostitutes or mental patients. How did that contradict what I had said? I have to say, if I'd been there by myself, this would have been a pretty awful experience. But I had my boyfriend on the phone and Valerie right there with me. And so it was actually kind of wonderful to walk through the festival with her. She enjoyed meeting writers. She especially enjoyed meeting Walter Mosley. They really hit it off. And also it was great, kind of a privilege in a strange way, to be able to put these two very disparate, but for me, very dynamic and creative parts of my life together. But in the aftermath, the uncertainty stayed. And I wondered if maybe people had reacted as they did for deeper reasons than I understood. I wanted to understand, or at least explore. And so I wrote a story about it called The Agonized Face. Sometimes when I write a fictional story, I like to tell it from an oppositional point of view. And this story is told from the point of view of a female journalist who was assigned to cover a literary festival and finding herself very provoked by a ridiculous faux feminist writer who is a somewhat unflattering fictional version of myself. For example, I have never said that I think prostitutes are fighters against patriarchy because I don't think that. Anyway, the journalist describes the awful writer this one. She was a girl who needed to be protected, and a woman standing to protect the girl. But then she became the other thing, the feminist, who makes girls into sluts. She sprouted 3 heads and asked that we accept all of them, which I did not do. I didn't do that. She also has some other things to say about the time she interviewed a sad sack stripper, and also something really awful she witnessed on the set of a talk show that was on the subject of rape. And she describes something that she calls the place of no place, where a respectable man might descend with a despised woman and have an experience, and then return in his suit and tie to be good. She links all of these things to what she calls the secret royalty of female nature. Maybe sounds bonkers, maybe it is. But I think it says something about the nerve that I touched at that festival. Apparently somebody said somewhere online that reading The Agonized Face made him feel like clawing his eyeballs out. I don't think he meant it as a compliment, but I'll take it as one. In part because writing that meant that I didn't have to do that. Thank you.